Hi, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This presentation is for the OLP 5510 Principles of Change course at Idaho State University, and it will cover Beach's change model. And so we can go ahead and we'll just go ahead and begin. So the objectives of this presentation, first off, is to understand the history and need for a change, recognize the value of a strategic plan or having a plan, and then also providing an overview of Beach's change model, followed by what the individual phases of that change model are. All right, so jumping straight in there, the need to change. Question is since when do we need to change? How long has change been around? And so I think it's important to recognize the longevity or the permanence that change has had in civilization. Some people say it's the only constant that does exist. It's been around throughout all history, and it's normal. And it happens so automatically. It's simple. And yet at the same time, it can be very complex and challenging for many individuals. Some people might even go into great effort to prevent change from taking place. But, a lot of places we can see, for example, in the cult classic movie Groundhog Day, even though the exact same thing happens over and over and over every single day, just inserting one human exercising, in this case, his own will every single day, even though it's the same, changes. And it's different just because of the insertion of the human element. Some people say that change is bad. Other people say change is good. Once I interviewed somebody and asked her, she was actually interviewing for a vice president position. And I said, hey, tell me about your philosophy, your perspective on change. And she actually said change doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good or bad. However, change always brings opportunity. I loved that, and it's stuck with me forever. So change is always going to be there. It's always going to create opportunities. What are we going to do with that information? So what? It can just happen. It's going to just happen on its own. But without proactive managing that change, the results typically don't come out exactly the way we want. And the solution, we have to lead the change. We need to be the ones driving a specific outcome rather than allowing it to just lead us or direct us how we're going to live life. And so, in fact, in one of our textbooks, Jeffrey and Linda Russell indicated that people embrace change on their own terms. This is absolutely true, as psychodynamic theory suggests. We're each going to process different experiences differently. And that happens as we filter through those experiences based on our individual collection of lifelong experiences. Somebody who's gone through adverse change experiences through their childhood might have the experience with change and say, I had nothing to do with it. But that being the case, the bigger the change is, the more challenging it is for individuals to embrace. Other people who've always had positive experiences with change, they're going to be perhaps responding to change much more favorably. So next steps, how are we going to approach this? How are we going to approach change? How do we respond? So I like this little diagram or this little illustration of the woman who's following. She's cooking something and she's got her book up. She's not reading a novel. She's got a recipe book and she's following the instructions. You have to have certain components in place and you follow the directions. If you don't do it, it's not going to turn out exactly like perhaps you expected or hoped it would. And so as this applies to change, we call that change management. ProSci in 2003 mentioned that change management, to define it, is the enabling framework for managing the people side of change. So I think that's really important because change is going to happen a lot, but most inanimate objects aren't going to influence more than just what they're programmed to do, right? But people are not as predictable. So that includes the need for planning. communication, collaboration. Some cases, there's going to be coaching and counseling people through the change initiatives. In an organization, managing change creates opportunities to not only improve our performance and outcomes, but streamline existing processes and ultimately to increase our competitive edge, give us a higher level of presence in the market share. It's important. We need to have a plan, and it's important to have a good strategy. All right, so strategy. It's essential. It's having a strategy, and I chose this diagram. It's an arrow going into its target, hitting the bullseye. And having a strategy is a lot like an archer knowing their target, seeing their target, having already trained and practiced the behaviors it takes to fire the arrow, to shoot the arrow into the target, having good equipment or resources to manage hitting that target, and then following through those steps so that they can successfully hit that target. Without the strategy, an archer might be blindfolded. Instead of a bow and arrow, a handful of wet noodles, the target might be on fire and it's in a different city. Who knows what might happen? Strategy and a plan is essential. Without so with managing change, there's many components to this. Previously mentioned, there's the people side of change, and that perhaps is the most complex, time-consuming, and pivotal element of change management. People are going to show up with past fears, adverse experiences, baggage, communication gaps, insecurities, cultural differences, and the list continues. Each change itself might have a diverse array of stakeholders. Each group or population of stakeholders needs to be addressed on their terms. And that has to be taken into consideration as well and managed proactively. So outside of the people side of change, we need to have strategy by looking at processes, technology, organizational differences, relationships within the community, and any other possible systemic relationships. Everything can be interwoven and connected and affect each other. There might be a few people in the world who have such amazing memories, they can track all of this in their head and just do it. Okay, I doubt there is anyone that can do all of that. And if they are, they're a rare exception. As far as organizational change, implementing and exercising a change plan, the path to success in these endeavors requires us to have a plan and a strategy. We need to process it out first, and then not only to have those, but to be able to communicate them and bring everyone on board. Having that strategy, it offers direction, it offers assurance, it offers control. It ensures that we have goals and that those goals are communicated clearly. So that's kind of the strategy behind change. So there's so many change models out there. I mean, you can see some of these. One of them, Lewing's freezing. First unfreezing, make the change, refreezing process. That change model, it's simple, it's easy. He actually first published his model in 1947, and then go on through the future. There's been a lot of different ones. Some of them focus on certain elements of change, others less. Elaine Beach in 2007 decided that none of them quite hit the mark for how she felt change could be addressed. You get too many steps, like Evans and Schaefer's 10 tasks, it might be overwhelming for people. You get too few, like Lewin's 3 steps, it might not really hit all areas that need to be addressed with managing change. So Beach came up with a 6-step model for implementing change, and that's what we're going to get into here. So her model itself is an acronym based on the word change. All right, so let's go through that. And each one of these letters represents a phase in the 6 phases of her model. Phase 1, challenge the current state. Now, this is just to give you an overview right now of what the acronym stands for. We're going to go into each one of these here in just a few moments. and to explain what they are, what we do, and the benefit we receive through going through each one of these phases. So step one, challenge the current state. Step two, harmonize and align leadership. The A, step three, stands for activate commitment. That one isn't as intuitive, so we'll go into activate commitment once we get to that slide. Phase number four is the N, and that's nurture and formalize a design. The fifth phase is guide implementation. And lastly, E is for evaluating and institutionalizing that change. It's really about, I mean, by the time we get to step six, the change is a done deal, but we want it to stay that way. We always want to learn and grow. We'll talk more about that when we get to that slide. So first step, phase one, challenge the current state. I love this. This graphic I put on here, it's a duel, it's a challenge. If you know the movie reference, it's Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There's a challenge about to go down here. And so although the name of this phase makes it sound like you're about to go into battle, it does not have to be so extreme. You know, some people think, well, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Let it go. We don't need change. We don't need a flavor of the week. We don't need just to change things for the sake of changing things. But usually there's data to represent that there's opportunities missed, or perhaps there's a declining ROI or return on our investment for the efforts and performance that's happening, or for whatever other shifts in an organization. There's going to be metrics typically that talk through, represent what the current performance is and what its potential could be, or maybe the direction it's been traveling, and that might warrant a change. So data is super important. Having good data empowers decision makers to make good decisions. All right, the next step is to determine organizational readiness. This one's really important. It's important before we even go into managing change or any change model. We need to understand, well, what's going on with my organization? How do they respond to change? How do they typically or historically manage change anyways? What resources are available? What should I expect or be ready for? Going through and having those conversations, whether you're having them with project management organization within your organization, with executives, with other leaders, or if it's a small organization, you might just be having this conversation with yourself, and that's appropriate because it needs to take place. If you actually want sustainability of your change to exist as a part of the outcome of your change initiative, you're definitely going to want to know and understand what your organization is ready for and what they're capable of. All right, next piece with challenging the current state is to establish change management roles. This is essential. It's going to affect everyone somehow, some way, even if it doesn't affect you directly, but it affects somebody that you interact with regularly. That's going to affect the way they interact with you because it's part of their reality. So we need to have, as we go through this change initiative, we need to have the right people in the right places. We need to have subject matter experts to complete specific tasks. We need to have an executive sponsor who champions the change, promotes it, and leads and models the desire or the view or vision, I should say, of what the outcome is going to be. It's important to have agents of change or embed people within the organization that can promote and encourage others to champion this change. And of course, we also need to have good leadership who understand what change management's like, how these interactions with employees go, and also understand the risk of not being on board. So that's essential with these different roles that need to take place with change management. The next component is building a business case. This is the last piece on challenging the current state, but building the business case, it really helps understand just how does this change align with and support future business objectives. We have performance goals, we have revenue producing objectives. What is this change going to do to either support or influence those? If it doesn't do anything for them, they might question, well, how necessary is this change, right? Understanding that return on investment, and also understanding perhaps you don't have a ton of gains by making the change, but what's the opportunity cost if the change is not taken or implemented? And so perhaps by not implementing it, we might have I don't know, it could be a governmental audit and there's fines or fees or something if you don't make adjustments. And so this change might help to avoid adverse consequences. So having that business case really is essential to translating to why is this so important for the organization. And that's definitely part of challenging the current state. All right, the next phase. So phase 2, this is letter H, and that's harmonize and align leadership. So I love that. Harmonize, I think of soothing music. Align, I'm a car guy. I start thinking of a car vehicle wheel alignment. And so, of course, you're going to get graphics that reference that. If you want a car, in order for a car, I picked a precision, highly tuned car. So these are clips from the Indy 500. These cars, if they're going to run right, those wheels have to be aligned. That means they got to be pointing in the same direction. They got to be the same size, have the same air pressure. They have to have the same wear, and they even have to be at the same angle. You know, they can't be off camber, basically. And if that isn't happening, if they're not all working towards the same goal and they're working even a little bit against each other, it causes excessive wear and tear. It drains resources, inefficiencies pop up, and in some cases, you might experience equipment failure that could result in a lack of control and potentially catastrophe. And even though here we've got some guy that's having a rough day with the collision with the wall, who knows what could have caused that? Equipment failure often is caused by small incremental things that their aggregate can have adverse consequences that are devastating. Change is no different. Patrick Henry, one of our American, I guess, forefathers or founding fathers, in 1799, he quoted, I'm going to quote him, he said, quote, "United we stand, divided we fall," close quote. That quote is a great match for understanding this second phase of harmonizing and aligning leadership in Beach's change model. People need to be on board. All individuals within an organization need to be on board. Without that, trying to drive change and everybody's pulling different directions, you may as well take up herding cats. So, all right, I'll get into these components of harmonizing and aligning leadership. First one, sell success. A leader sells success. They're visionary. They're going to talk about, here's our outcome. Here are the benefits. They're inspiring. They're going to have enthusiasm and energy. They're going to have those positive vibes that people look to. And this leader, that leadership is based on the qualities I just mentioned. It is not based on rank. It doesn't have to be a title or a position. You got to have the right person do this. And hopefully we do have leaders that have those qualities that are in those positions as well. Additionally, they need to be wise, or in other words, they need to have the education, the experience. They have to have the knowledge, and understanding the organization and how different components of the organization interact, not just their own little microcosm. So next component, get recruits. We got to bring everyone on board. Frontline leadership needs to be on board. The frontline employees, the doers that are getting things done, they need to understand that they are a critical component of the change implementation initiative. We have to have executive leadership and support. I've been in organizations where they wanted it, but didn't want to walk the walk, and it fell apart. We have to have executives that are on board to model it, culminating, or I should say, with a CEO or one executive who takes the lead on it. That's our executive sponsor. That's essential. In addition, with these recruits or people you're bringing on board to help facilitate the change implementation process, we need agents of change, people who are responsible for their diverse areas to drive and promote it, similar to what a leadership would typically do. And then, of course, often with the organization of that, some organizations are large enough to have a PMO or a project management organization, or maybe just project managers. If those individuals are available, they're invaluable in driving change in an organization. All right. The next component with harmonizing and aligning leadership is to understand and address barriers. These can usually be overcome. These are the obstacles, the hesitations, the reservations that people might have. And these are going to happen at all levels, including executives. They can usually be overcome with clear and concise communication, clear vision that's communicated, having good data to support the goals and the benefits that we're talking about, having realistic expectations, and using appropriate resources or artifacts or that we can use to track and manage the change. And then lastly, constant ongoing reinforcement. We're trying to change is not just doing a one-time shot. It's changing quite literally behaviors. And those behaviors that are already in place are typically habits. And so you're not just having a one-time event, you're starting a new habit and also ceasing an old habit, both of which have to be addressed. That cannot happen without time and practice and repetition. And so that ongoing reinforcement needs to take place, and it needs to happen with the agents of change. Needs to happen everywhere, because there's going to be some that hold out and they're going to have a hard time, and that's okay. Not everybody gets it and goes jumping right on board as quickly as others, and they'll get there, but we just need to make sure we're listening to them and we're answering questions and we're providing those benefits, and that we're kind of it's an iterative process with how we're reinforcing that. All right. Third phase of the change is activate commitment. So now that everyone's on board, it's time to get to work. Activate commitment phase is a segment in which the change plan is designed. This is a designing phase. The work that is needed to accomplish might be broken into different phases. Subject matter experts are probably going to be identified here. Teams might be formed. Leaders are going to be given assignments. A lot of times we identify who the agents of change are, or these individuals might be or are the agents of change. This particular step of activate commitment, this answers the question how regarding the strategy. How are we going to implement the strategy for implementing change? So this happens, number one, design the plan. This is making a roadmap. This is what's going to look like on day one, day two, week one, all the way through to the end of the change. The next piece is what resources do we have? Human capital is a wonderful, very powerful resource, and taking inventory of the skills, the experience that people bring to the table is essential. Other resources, one that's essential is going to have a well-serving communication tool. How are we going to communicate? How often are we going to have meetings, etc.? And then lastly, documentation. We need to have documents updated. They need to be kept. They need to be available to the right people with the right information. Sometimes that might be include other artifacts as well. We'll move on to those in a little bit. All right. Part of strategy, but part of activate commitment is we need to be inclusive, and that's strategically inclusive. So we need to have this. What this means is having the right people in the right places at the right times, doing the right things, and they need to be doing it in the right way. And so all of that's hard to arrange, and it's not, like I said, nobody's going to be able to just do that. It takes intense collaboration, coordination, but it can totally happen. When it does, it's magical. All right, the last one is prepare for resistance. What is that Star Trek saying? Resistance is futile, right? It's a reality. People are going to resist. We need to anticipate doubts and objections. We need to be prepared to address them, understanding that it's okay for people to resist. In fact, when they have those those doubts they express, agents of change need to see that as a gift. This is great feedback. Because if one person's feeling it, chances are somebody else is. So being open to that feedback, embracing it, allowing some vulnerability, knowing that we don't have all the answers, but we're certainly going to try the best we can and be organized and professional as we go throughout it. That level of vulnerability and acceptance, allowance of people to resist, that builds trust. And if we want change to have that sustainability, trust is essential. All right, the fourth phase of the Elaine Beach's change model: nurture and formalize a design. So in the nurture and formalize a design phase, change agents are going to use tools or artifacts, in some places it's called, I think that's more of an agile terminology, to document and formalize what the change management process is. They're going to assess risk. They're going to like, okay, what do we need to have in mind and how are we going to track all of this? And that's absolutely appropriate. So this is going to be looking at the system, and the system really can be that interconnectedness, that interrelationship of everything within the organization and how each component influences the other components. So that system might include naturally the people, but also the processes, the procedures, what compensation looks like, how it's delivered, what different levels exist. It could be what history exists with change in the organization, HR practices, hiring practices, just all of that. We need to understand, first analyze and have a good understanding of what the system looks like. The next piece is goals. We have a change because we want to reach a certain objective. That's our goal. We need to set that goal, and it needs to be measured. We need to understand, well, how am I going to measure? How do I know if I've been successful? How am I going to measure that? So that's a big part of the nurture and formalized design as well. I mentioned briefly risk before. We need to anticipate risk. Some people would look at this as scenario planning. It could be risk identification, one of the resources used for managing risk is called a risk assessment tool. So it's a sheet that's managed to identify what risks potentially could exist. There's going to be some that are known risks, some that are unknown risks. How much potential will this affect the overall project or a change initiative? And then what are the recourses for addressing that if and when it happens? So those contingencies need to be planned out, and that's all part of this design phase, which includes the risk. Okay, so the last component that I want to go over for the nurture and formalizing a design is having the right tools and artifacts. And these could be Gantt charts, like the one in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide that shows what task needs to be completed, when it needs to be completed. And there's a chart called a PERT chart, which is the program evaluation and review technique that was designed, gosh, I think it was near the end of World War II by the U.S. Army to develop these PERT charts for production. And it helps to understand what's my critical path. Some tasks have to be completed before other tasks. Some of them can be moved around, but it helps to create efficiencies and understanding the order and rank. Some tasks that we can do in this change initiative can be done simultaneously, and some don't even care when it's done, as long as it gets done. These PERT charts kind of organize that flow and identifies that critical path so that we can be as efficient as possible, make assignments in the right place. It also helps us to know what resources can be used for each task. We can't, our resources are limited, and we can't put all of them onto a task at the same time because, we may not be able to have a certain person working 5 tasks at once, or using a building for 5 different groups of people when only one group fits in there. So those critical paths are essential, and that's part of the PERT chart. Other things that are tools and artifacts include just having a role or responsibility matrix, having a clear understanding of who's involved and what the responsibility, who are the decision makers, and how that's going to be carried out. So that is the nurture and formalize a design phase of Beach's change model. All right, so our penultimate phase of the change model is guide implementation. And some people might say that the guide implementation step is where the rubber meets the road. To kind of go back to the car analogy, the guide implementation step, this is our action step. This might be tricky because most of the time the individuals that are engaged in supporting and carrying out the tasks involved in the change process, these folks all still have, usually anyways, full-time organizational responsibilities. They have their regular jobs that they're doing, and these change managers or project managers are saying, hey, oh, by the way, I also need to do these components that help us drive change. That's hard sometimes, especially when these change managers usually don't have a whole lot of enforcement power. They have influential power, and if they coordinate well with others, then they might be able to create organization. But that's really what this is all about, is encouraging that involvement. And it includes talking to people, providing updates to management, holding regular meetings so people are in the know, following up with emails, engaging our stakeholders, and you're still at this point, even though you're now in the final phase kind of the implementation process, you're still going to have naysayers out there. It's still important. It's essential. Connect with those naysayers, talk to them, listen to them, find out what's going on. How can we support you? And that's essential. That's all part of encouraging involvement. The next piece of this phase I would call is sharing those gains, especially the short-term gains. A lot of those naysayers are going to be like, this isn't going to be of any value. This is stupid. Why are we doing this? You're going to have gains. You're going to have wins, small ones, even if it's a short one. If it's small, doesn't matter. It starts to build momentum when people know about it. They can say, hey, wait a second, this has value for me. And so showing that effort, showing those wins, and to people brings them on board. The naysayers stop being naysayers and they start saying, hey, maybe this is all right. And they get on board. It shows them that the effort that they're putting into this is worth the trouble. And it's essential to promote those wins and market those within the organization. Last one is motivate. I like my little graphic here of the cheerleader because you know what? Everybody needs to be on board and supporting, but it needs to be authentic and genuine, not just, if it's fake, it's not going to give you the sustainability that you really want. But motivating is to engage with people at all levels. Sometimes the executives might be the naysayers, but we need to reinforce that value, promote and advertise those wins. And then also it's essential to show gratitude and appreciation. There's a lot of people who are going to be working and doing a lot of things here. And it goes a long way to write them a thank you note. Send them an email, pick up a phone to say, hey, saw what you did on task X, Y, and Z. And I don't think anyone could have done any better. That was amazing. Appreciation. People want to feel like they're making a difference and that it has value. And so that's essential. And it really drives that motivation. All right, last phase. Beach's change model is evaluate and institutionalize the change. So right now, by the time we've got to this phase, the change, the steps to driving and implementing this change have already taken place. This phase, this evaluation component of the phase, it really embraces reflection. It assesses what we've already been doing, how things went. It assesses the whole process for the purpose, and this is all the purpose of learning and growing and making improvements for the future. It's really about continuous improvement. What went well? What didn't go well? What can we do better next time? We want to be able to make, changes isn't easy anyways. So how can we make it better next time? And if we can make those improvements, again, you're going to build trust with those employees, those individuals in the organization. And the next time you say, hey, we got a new change initiative, instead of running and hiding, they're going to say, wasn't so bad last time. Let's see what you got to say. And they'll probably be more on board. And so these evaluations can take place in a number of ways. You can send out assessments or surveys, queries to people, questionnaires. You can interview people either individually or by groups or even focus groups. Having that, gaining that data, that feedback, it really helps to get that data so that we can have that retrospective and look at, okay, what can we do better and how will we do it better? There's a couple different pieces of the change process that is being evaluated. One of them is the process itself. All of those steps in our design and development phases. How did that all work? But even more important, I don't know if it's more important, but equally important is the impact of the change. Did it achieve the results we hoped for? And is supposed to be measurable. Let's look at that data. How did it measure up against what we anticipated? And really helps us to understand that this was a valuable change and this is our return on our investment, or maybe it wasn't, and we can factor that in when we do the initial challenge the current state for a future change. And then institutionalize. Institutionalize is it's really about causing permanency, long-term sustainability with that change. We need to keep people involved. And this happens by continuing to discuss the change effort, continuing to report on successes and celebrate them with the employees or any of the stakeholders. Sometimes those stakeholders aren't internal to the organization, so it's important to be mindful of them, but always to discuss those benefits with those stakeholders, and to continue to use a communication plan. If you've developed one because you didn't have it and it worked, why stop using it? So keep using that. And then if you see, there's possibility that some individuals might have regressive behaviors. How do you identify those? So making a plan to identify those and then how to address them when it happens. So that constitutes the different components that are comprised in the evaluate and institutionalize the change phase in the Beach change model. All right, so in summary, there are a few outcomes of this change model. And the first one, of course, is what we're trying to do is, number one, it increases our success rate of our goals, by having a model that we're following, having a strategy. And this particular model, I think, it's tried and true. It's very successful. And so by using it, we're higher probability of meeting those goals. We will be able to continue to focus on the organization's strategic initiatives, and then meeting them, of course. And then having this model, it lays everything out. If we take time to go through every single one of these phases and do our due diligence, it provides a great roadmap. So you don't have to really think about too many things, just to follow the plan. Create the plan, follow the plan, meet the goals, and then celebrate. Always got to celebrate. So that's my presentation on Elaine Beach's change model, 6-step model, going back to her, there it is right there, her acronym on the change: challenge current state, harmonize line leadership, activate commitment, nurture and formalize design, guide implementation, evaluate and institutionalize the change. So thank you very much. I hope this presentation was educational and insightful, and have a good day.